How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 269 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, as I said last week, we're going to be chatting all things fruit trees this week, and to do that, I'm delighted to be joined by Susan Poizner. And Susan is the educator. She talks all things fruit trees on the Orchard People. So she has written several books on fruit tree care. She has a recent book which we'll chat about, and she runs online courses on pruning fruit trees and general fruit tree care. So this is going to be a pretty deep topic of, looking after fruit trees. So we've spoke many times on the podcast about creating orchards, about picking and choosing correct varieties. We've recommended certain varieties. So now we're going to, I suppose, a slightly different angle on it, which is the aftercare of fruit trees. It's a hugely important piece because planting the fruit tree is one part of ensuring that you have healthy fruit down the line. The second part of it is the aftercare, particularly the pruning as you go through the various years. So, Susan, you're very, very welcome to Master My Garden podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, all of your work centers around fruit trees. So we have, as I said, we have fruit tree care books. We have the YouTube channel, The Orchard People. We have a monthly podcast on care for fruit trees. And so you do your online courses training, both home owners, arborists, all about fruit tree care. So it's a very you're going into this in a very, very deep level. So tell us a little bit about the backstory of the Orchard People before we get into how we actually do this and care for our fruit trees.
John, it's a crazy and very funny story, I think, because most of my life I did not do any gardening, nothing. I was a journalist. I worked for the BBC World Service. I used to live
Oh.
in the UK, doing Russian language educational programs, right? I don't know how I came to this, but I do.
So
What
go back there,
happened?
Russian what?
Russian educational radio programs to this. But I
Wow.
guess what happened was I lived in the UK for many years and I came back to Toronto to my parents were aging. It was time. And I was not married at that time. And I came back and I met my husband Cliff here. And Cliff is from Trinidad originally, when he left when he was 9. And so in Trinidad, John, you just like throw a seed down and a tree grows and you get mangoes, right? Like
Yeah.
whatever, or avocados. He remembers growing avocados. So he moved in with me and I had a backyard. And he's like, "Oh, this is a good backyard. Can I plant something? Like, let's plant something." And I'm like, "Oh, no, 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 no. I know what's going to happen. You're going to go all out. You're going to plant everything, and I'm going to have to take care of it. And I don't do that." So, anyways, long story short, I said, "Okay, fine, you can do like 5 tomato plants." And I left the house and I come back, the entire garden is planted up with God knows everything. But I fell in love with gardening, so much so that I got a little diverted. I signed up for a landscape design course to try and like just understand more about plants and about design. And during that course, I realized there was one thing that captivated me, and that was trees.
Mhm.
Because, like, I love vegetables, I love growing veggies and flowers. But trees are like these beings. They come back year after year. Like they're there. They're there. It's not like a zucchini plant at the end of the season. You dig it out and you throw it in the compost. So these trees, I started to look at trees on the street so differently. And then it just dawned on me that there are fruit trees that they don't just look beautiful, shade our communities, clean our air, but they also feed us. These are the most generous beings ever. And they can live up to like over 100 years. And I was fascinated. Long story short, I ended up starting a community orchard in my local park and planted these trees. And at that point, I was an organic gardener. I kind of knew what I was doing. And I thought that the fruit trees would be easy. And please, John, don't laugh because they're so not easy. And I planted these trees. The whole community was looking, this had to be a success. Some people didn't even want this project. So I knew I had to be meticulous. And then the trees got sick and then they weren't growing well. And then the fruit wasn't good. And I had to go and use my journalistic skills to figure out what was going wrong and how do I take care of these trees? What is the minimum I need to do to keep these trees healthy and productive? So that started my journey.
Wow, that's an interesting story. Just go back to community garden. You created a community fruit garden. How many trees are we talking here? Is this a big garden? Is it?
The park is not huge. It's more of a parkette, but the original plan that I worked on with my city councilor and our park supervisor was to have, I think it was 28 or 34 trees.
Hmm.
There was a community uprising, a petition against having a fruit farm in the park. And so we went through all the process of, negotiating whatever. In the end, we were allowed to plant, I think, 14 or 18 trees. To be honest, I don't count anymore because I think about 15 years ago, well, the agreement was blah, blah, blah. I don't know how many trees we have. We have as
Hmm.
many as we have. We've got apricots, we've got apples, we've got Asian pears, we have plums, service berries, all sorts of good stuff there.
Yeah, super. The community gardens that allow fruit trees in, it's a win-win across so many levels because fruit trees in the flowering stage can be extremely beautiful. So you're ticking that box. Obviously, from the point of view of biodiversity, flower again, useful for your pollinators and so on. And they are a fruit tree is very, very beautiful, and it's filling the like we've spoke on the podcast over the last couple of weeks about trees in urban environments, particularly from the point of view of shade, water, slowing down water and all of those things. But fruit trees will do that and give the extra benefit of having some food available from them. So they really are. It's not something that's adapted very much here in Ireland yet, but it's something that I really hope does because it's it's doing exactly what all other trees do, plus the extra bonus on the end of it. So it's great.
So I'm going to inject here a little warning. So people used to talk to me like, you're the fruit tree lady, you love fruit trees, and I do love fruit trees. But I don't believe in planting them willy-nilly. So I think it's great to plant fruit trees. I think our project is incredible and other community orchard projects are incredible. But you can only be successful with fruit trees if you care for them. So when I first started doing fruit tree care education, there was one line I was teaching people. I thought, if I can teach people this one thing, I am successful because people were oblivious. And the one line is fruit trees need hands-on care.
Mhm.
So if people can understand that, then they can plant fruit trees because then they'll say, okay, what's the hands-on care they need? Of course, they need mulching, that's fine. But without correct feeding, pruning, pest and disease protection, they can be very messy. And the worst part is if you have a messy, unhealthy fruit tree in your backyard and somebody else is lovingly caring for their fruit tree a few yards over or even a few blocks over, the pest and disease problems that your trees attract will affect everybody.
Mhm.
So it is like having a baby. You, it's it's time commitment, right? It's a
Yeah,
lifetime commitment. And it's like, I don't have babies, but I'm sure if I did, I would get a book saying, how do you care for this baby? Like, how do you change a diaper? How do you help them and nurture them, right?
yeah.
And fruit trees are very similar. So,
Mm.
so that's why I find it interesting that you say, oh my gosh, you've got this huge body of work all around fruit trees, and it's true. And I keep getting deeper and deeper into it because they are these incredibly beautiful but complex beings, and there's so much more to learn. Saying that there is a minimum that you can learn in order to grow healthy and productive fruit trees. You don't have to go deep into the weeds like I have.
Yeah. So yeah, I suppose that's something that I like to convey on the podcast. So it's we talk a lot about growing food on the podcast, and obviously fruit trees have come up a lot because, as you said, they're a year on year really good source of food, so long as you get the basic care principles right. So let's talk about those basic care principles. As you said, you have a big body of work. There is levels to all of this, but let's talk about, as you said, the minimum. the minimum that somebody needs to care for fruit trees. And maybe we'll get into the individual pruning and so on.
It's funny because we were growing our fruit trees in a public park. And in the public park, we were told no sprays, like certainly no toxic sprays, no pesticides, no fungicides. Um, and I'm like, oh, that's fine. I want to grow organically, not knowing that fruit trees just they are a magnet for certain diseases. Each tree has a finite number of diseases it can get. Like
Hmm.
the diseases that apple trees get aren't the same as the ones that plum trees get. But what I did learn after a few years of, getting confused, I brought in people to teach us. And the first and most important thing that I learned was pruning. The reason is pruning, people think, oh, it's just to make your tree smaller so that when your tree is, old and it's too high, you just cut it a little bit. And that's maybe one goal of pruning, but not the main goal. The main goal of pruning is to keep your tree healthy and productive. So, healthy in terms of preventing disease. Wow. How does pruning prevent disease? That was the first thing I had to get my head around. And the second thing is, how would cutting off branches make my tree more productive and produce better quality fruit? So, let's go into each of those. How does pruning make your tree healthier? How does it make it more resistant to disease? Well, I like to talk about air circulation. If your fruit tree has a whole tangle of branches that once they leaf out, they're all tightly, curled up
Yeah.
together, all the branches and the leaves are touching each other. Then when it rains, and you guys live in a rainy climate, I'm sure rainier than
Hmm.
us, when it rains, fungal spores hang out in the canopy. They love it. It's dark, it's damp, and they're like, this is heaven. I
Hmm.
love being in this tree. Um, and then you get fungal diseases like rust, which you get in apples and pears. Basically, I think 80% of all the diseases that fruit trees get are fungal diseases.
Yeah.
80%.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what happens when the canopy is crowded. But if you start to selectively remove branches, not trim them at the edges and like do a circle around your tree to make it look like a lollipop, not that, but remove entire branches from the inside of your tree, you're opening it up for air circulation. And if there's good air circulation, then the air blows in and dries out the canopy. And to make it even better, if you prune correctly, and not only is there good air circulation, but there's also sunlight penetration,
Hmm.
the sun will dry the canopy too. So with correct pruning, you are taking out a whole bunch of potential
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
So let's talk about fruit production. Why would correct pruning help your tree produce better quality fruit? Well, let's think about you. Okay, you wake up in the morning, you've got 10 jobs to do. If you do all 10 jobs, you are going to be running around all day, you're going to be exhausted, and you probably won't do each job really, really well. But if you say, you know what, today I'm going to focus on just 7 jobs, and the other 3 I'll save till tomorrow, you'll have time to do them better. It's the same thing with fruit trees. They have a finite amount of energy, especially in the early spring when they're doing a whole bunch of work. They're opening their buds, they're making blossoms, they're creating fruit. So at that time of year, if they have a whole bunch of branches to feed with energy from their root system, then each branch will get a little bit of energy. It'll grow a teeny tiny bit, um, maybe more than a bit or whatever. And it'll have some energy for fruit, but not a lot. But if you selectively remove some of those branches, then all of a sudden the remaining branches get more energy. They can grow longer, they can be stronger, and they can produce better quality fruit. There's some more nuances there, but that is the broad, that is just an easy way to look at why pruning helps so much and why it is the cornerstone of how you care for your fruit trees.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's obviously something I knew, but that's a really nice way of putting it, especially on the disease part, because you're right in that a lot of people view pruning as the shaping of the tree, which it is to a certain extent. But if you've chosen the right rootstock and so on, that's not really true. You should be working with something that's suitable for your garden anyway. So then it comes down to fruit production, which again, most people know about. But yeah, that's something I knew, but to have it pointed out like that is really good. So by doing correct pruning, you're opening up and not allowing, I suppose, havens for fungal diseases. It's very well put.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have to explain this a lot. And so I kind of think of, because it's so counterintuitive, it's like once I was teaching, I went to Virginia in the States to teach some arborists about pruning. And for some bizarre reason, they wanted me to do the pruning demo before teaching people why you do this pruning. So there's all these arborists standing around. And I'm like starting to demo by pruning a very young tree. Like I was a young apricot or something, peach or something. And I go in with my hand pruners and I'm demonstrating, I'm explaining how I'm going to take off an entire branch. Like this tree has maybe 10 branches, and I go in and I'm cutting off one of these young, healthy branches. One of the arborists almost pulled me back to stop me. She's like, "Don't do that. It's a healthy branch. Why are you doing that?"
Hmm.
And that's the other mind-blowing thing about pruning. You are taking beautiful, healthy branches and you're cutting them off and throwing them away.
Hmm. Yeah.
So there's just a bit of a change in mindset that's necessary.
Yeah. So when the how-to part of pruning, so obviously we're looking to open up the center. So what and how do we go about pruning, say, a 2, 3 year old apple tree, for an
Well,
example?
then this is the thing. Now, there's two structures. One structure is what you discussed, which may be popular over there, and it's the open center. So your tree ends up looking like a goblet or a
Yeah.
cup, and there's no central branch in the middle. And
Hmm.
then there's a secondary structure, which is called central leader, where you have one branch in the middle, and you're creating a sort of Christmas tree shape. There's pros and cons for both of those. They are both very fruitful. Like, you're producing fruit. Central leader can be a little bit sturdier in a windy climate, whereas open center gets these long branches that in a wind, like a heavy wind, the branches can easily break. And then whoops, you've lost a whole, it's a whole big deal.
Hmm.
With central leader, it's sturdier. But now you say, how would you prune a 2 or 3 year old apple tree? Let's take it back. Ultimately, John, and if you've been talking about rootstocks, you've probably been encouraging people to plant bare root trees,
Yeah.
which are not in a pot, which are very young. So the ideal way is to prune your fruit tree. The first time you prune it is on the day you plant your bare root tree, the
Hmm.
very day. So you plant the bare root tree in the ground, you water it in, and you make something called a whip cut. So your tree, a bare root tree that's young, just looks like a stick or a branch with roots. There's no side branches, and that's ideal. That's what you want, the youngest tree possible, because it's like sculpting. You're sculpting your perfect structure for a tree. So you do your whip cut. You probably are cutting off the top third of the
Yeah.
tree at least. And often you are cutting it up to, oh goodness, I'm going to say in inches. Let's say you'll cut it at 34 inches off the
Yeah.
ground. Not sure. Okay. So then what you're doing is by removing the top of that whip, you are removing the hormones there called auxin hormones. Auxin hormones make it go up higher and higher. They pull
Yeah.
the tips higher and higher. But what happens is when you cut off those auxin hormones, it gives the side buds an opportunity to flourish, right?
Hmm.
Because that auxin is very domineering. It's like, you side buds, you don't do much. I'm gonna lead here. Once you get rid of the auxins, the side buds start opening up and you start getting side branches. And so what you would do is that year, so you do your whip cut in year one, and in year two, you choose your scaffold branches, your side branches out of the options the tree gives you. You're not going to keep any side branches that are below your knee because that's too low for fruit.
Hmm.
Okay. Depending on which structure you're using, you are going to choose, and let's talk about open center. You will choose 3 to 5 scaffold branches near the top. They should be a couple of inches apart, maybe, so that it just keeps it more sturdy. And each of those branches will go in a different direction. So if there's 4 of them, it could be one goes north, one goes south, one goes east, one goes west. But they
Hmm.
all have to be in a different direction, not, 4 of them on one side and one on the
Hmm.
other. And those you will nurture to become your structure. So the problem is if people wait until year 2 or 3, you've missed the opportunity to sculpt your tree into the ideal structure. You can still prune it, and you should, but now once the tree is older, what I tell people to do is learn how to do the structure and then adapt it to your tree. So sometimes you can take an established tree and look at it and say, okay, I can make this into a central leader tree. This is how. But even if you can't, once you understand all the science behind pruning, you can look at any tree, even like a 20-year-old tree that's been neglected, and slowly renovate it so that it is a healthy and productive tree. I'll just say throw one more thing in. If you're pruning an older tree, any like older than 3, 4 years old, you can only prune off 25% of the canopy. So let's say you buy my book, Fruit Tree Pruning. It's called Fruit Tree Pruning, The Science and Art of Cultivating Healthy Fruit Trees. You buy my book and you read it. Then you're looking at your tree and say, okay, I can make that shape. I can do this. But if you do it all in 1 year, it'll freak out your tree. You have to do it slowly. So 25% of, correcting the structure 1 year, and then wait for it to grow. And then the next year, do another 25%. And in 4 years, you're going to have the perfect structure and a really healthy tree that produces great fruit.
Yeah, that's interesting, and loads in there. I got to go back to
Sorry.
your very original point. It's funny, the goblet style open center pruning is the most popular here, and it's interesting that you say it's less suited to a windy climate because we are, and increasingly so, we're getting a lot of wind. We've always had wind, but recently we've been getting quite storm-like conditions on a more regular basis. So it would seem then that the amount of fruit trees that are in that in that open center are not ideally suited to the changing climate. So maybe we'll just delve a little bit further into the
Yeah,
central
let
leader.
me, yeah, well, okay. So I love that you made that point, and thank you so much for sharing that with me. The benefit of the goblet, of the open center structure, is another thing that you guys have, which is a really wet climate.
Mhm.
You can't do better at keeping the canopy dry than that open center shape.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why your growers there do that shape. And I guess they're willing, or at least maybe you say the wind is getting worse and worse. So maybe they were willing to put up with the wind. If you have to, if you've only got one backyard tree, there are ways that you can support long branches with, wooden setups. I'm not much of a woodworker.
Mm.
Um, but yes, so that's interesting. So on the one hand, it's so great for the open canopy is great for wet climates. But now let's talk about windy climates. So here's what happens with central leader. You have this one central trunk that turns into the top branch. And you have, let's say 2 or 3, I call them platforms on it. So you're doing the whip cut in year 1, but each year you select, let's say 4 branches in different directions, north, south, east, west, but the leader. With open center, you're getting rid of the leader. There's no leader. Then
Hmm.
you let the leader go up a little bit further. So you've got the first platform, it's at, let's say, knee height. You let your leader go up further, and let's say at my waist height, I can have platform 2. Another 4, let's say 4 branches, going
Yeah,
in slightly different directions so they're not shading the ones
yeah.
below it. Then finally, if I want the third platform, it can be at my shoulders. And this is just, it depends on the rootstock you have, the size of the tree, the vigor of the tree.
Mm.
The idea is there that you have about 2 feet of open space between platforms. where the trunk is clean. There's no
Mhm.
branches. If anything pops up, you're snipping it off. Even rubbing it off if the tree is young, you could take your finger, you can rub off the little shoots if they're in the wrong place. Now, why does this structure, why is it so strong? Because you get more branches, um, and they're shorter. Each time you head back or shorten a branch, you are, again, that branch has limited amount of energy. So you are shortening the branch to fit into your triangle shape because you have three platforms. The top platform is sort of smaller than the middle one, and the middle one is smaller than the bottom one. So it's like a
Mhm.
triangle. And each time you shorten a branch to fit into that structure, there is more energy in the remaining buds, and the branch is able to thicken up more. It just has
Mhm.
more energy for everything, for fruit, for thickening up, which is called secondary tree growth. So you get this kind of like stout, little strong, little muscular tree.
Yeah.
So I'm tall and willowy, right? I'm kind of tall. I got long arms, I got long legs. My husband is sort of shorter and he's like, he's got lots of strength, right? And it's because of his structure. He's got shorter branches. He's got
Yeah.
shorter
Yeah.
arms, but stronger, upper body, shorter legs. So that's the difference between open center,
Mhm.
and central leader.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It strikes me so yeah, that makes sense now that the reason like we are a very wet place on and I guess it comes to a balancing act which one is worse, and I would say the damp is certainly wider. They're all gone for the goblet style pruning. I think from a backyard perspective, which most of the listeners are, I think the goblet style probably suits better as well, because in my head I'm thinking at maturity it's a lot smaller in terms of height to manage, I would imagine. Am I correct in
that's
saying?
interesting because like for instance, cherry trees, oh my God, they get big,
Hmm.
and also the time of year is important when you prune in order to reduce size, and we can talk about that. That makes a big difference. But there's some trees like, yeah, like I like your point. Um, I guess if you want to keep it, I would love, if I lived in Ireland, I would do an experiment. And if I had enough space, I would experiment with some central leader trees because they are also good for air circulation. But I suppose, because it has platforms, even though these branches don't exactly, they shouldn't shade each other out, maybe it would retain a little bit more moisture. Yeah, it's like you say, you have to pick one, the lesser
Yeah.
evil, and decide which one to go for. But yeah, if your concern is, and it should be, the next thing that we should probably talk about is how do you keep a tree smaller?
Hmm.
And it has to do with the time of year that you prune. So for instance, we talked a little bit about the energy of the fruit tree in the winter. So the winter, the fruit tree has energy in its root systems. The previous year, it had leaves. It made lots of energy through photosynthesis. And in the fall, when you see the leaf color changes, that's because it's pulling the energy out of the leaves and putting it in the roots.
Hmm.
So it's like a little pantry over the winter. You've got all your goodies in your root system, and then the spring comes, and that's when that energy comes up and it powers the growth of the buds and the blossoms in the fruit. So that's why I explained earlier that if you remove, let's say you have 10 branches, if you remove three of those branches, each of the remaining branches will be longer and stronger. So winter pruning stimulates growth. It makes if you plant a young tree and you want it to grow faster and bigger, that's a good time to do it. But if you take a cherry tree that is already too big and you're like, okay, I'm going to do some winter pruning on this tree, what's going to happen? The cherry tree has big roots with lots of energy, and you're removing some branches to create your structure, or even, if you're making it into a lollipop, whatever you're doing with it, trimming around the edge or whatever you're doing, you don't know what you're doing, let's say. What's going to happen is it's going to stimulate even more growth because it's got all this energy in its root system. It's winter. and it'll have fewer buds, fewer branches, so each branch will grow more. But here's what happens. If you wait, so you let the season start, you let the cherry tree, or which it can be a big old apple tree or anything, bring up the energy and power growth of blossoms and even fruit. You let it do its thing. It's running a marathon. It's just running, 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 running. And then after blossom time, after the petals fall, then you start pruning. It doesn't have as much energy to bounce back. It's already used up its energy with this marathon. You're cutting off the energy. You're cutting off branches with, spent blossoms and baby fruitlets even on it. With our cherry trees in particular, because here we get cherries in the beginning of July. It's not too late to prune them. So we take, because our trees are big despite all the pruning, we take our pull pruners and we remove entire branches, knowing that they're not part of our structure, with the cherries on them so that we can get the high up cherries. And we share it with the community. We have a lot of fun. But at that point, the tree is not going to grow bigger and bigger for two reasons. One, it doesn't have lots of energy in the root system to power that. It's now making energy out of the leaves. But the second thing is hormones have shifted.
Mhm.
The auxin hormones that make branches longer were active in the winter. At this point, auxin hormones, they're not so active. But there's, I think it's called cytokinins. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. There's hormones that become active in the summer that tell the tree, hey, this is a good time to put energy towards buds for fruit for next year. So essentially, when you prune in the summer, the energy is going to go to fruit production. So everything we're doing, John, with our tree is a partnership. We are working with it, with the science so that we understand it, so we can have what everybody wants. Even the tree wants to be healthy and productive. It wants to fulfill its purpose. So we're working together, knowing and understanding how the trees work to have a healthy tree and a quality harvest.
Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose as we head for the end of March here, and we maybe look at so cherries we do grow here, but they're in certain parts of the country or they're undercover. Um, what our most popular fruit trees here, I guess, are apples, as you would expect. Plums, certainly popular as well, and pears to a certain extent. And again, that can be quite regional. They do better in certain parts of the country. So looking at the main three types of fruit here, ideal pruning periods for those three. What would you be
Brilliant.
saying?
Brilliant. That's so brilliant. Okay. Plums are very much like cherries, often, not always. Sometimes they have these long swooping branches that just want to be open center. The,
Hmm.
the way they grow sometimes, depending on the cultivar, depending on the rootstock, whatever, they grow to the open center structure. Plums, everyone that I've ever worked with are vigorous. So that means that in the first 3 years of formative pruning, it's called formative pruning. In the first 3 years, you probably will winter prune it because you want it to create a structure quickly. So, in my book, I outline the stages each year, what you do. Stage one is year one is whip cut, what you do year two and year three. So you create the structure in the winter in the first 3 years. After that, once it reaches the size you want it to reach, then you summer prune. We love pruning in our park. It is the funnest thing that we do. It is such a wonderful interactive thing. I went to the park and I thought, man, we have like zero to winter prune now. Nothing, hardly anything. And so here I've got this team of people. Everybody's going to have a hand pruner. Everybody wants to do the formative pruning, which is the funnest part. And there's like only cleanup pruning to do. And that's mostly in the summer. So here we're going to all stand around 3 trees and say, okay, what cuts will we make? And then it'll take 5 minutes, it'll be done. So the older trees, you summer prune. Okay. And not on a rainy day, by the way. You keep
Yeah.
it dry because, again, fungal diseases can go in those cuts. So apples, similar. Apples, mostly, the ones that we grow here, except for certain disease-resistant varieties, are pretty slow growing. For the first 3 to 5 years, we winter prune. The first 3 years, we're creating the structure. And the way we did it, because we didn't really know what we were doing at first, it maybe took 5 years to create the structure.
Yeah.
After that, you look and see how branchy is this tree. If it's got a million branches and sort of water sprouts sticking up for upward, sprouts on all the branches,
Yeah.
summer prune. There's too many branches. You want to keep that open structure, summer prune. And then we were talking about pears. Pears are similar to apples in that they can be slow growing. Some pears, some pears are interesting, like Asian pears. They don't really need a lot of pruning sometimes. Sometimes they just don't grow a lot of branches. They keep growing spurs, like a fruiting spurs. We've got an Asian pear in our park, and yeah, I mean, it could use a little prettying up, but in terms of air circulation, it's perfect.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I would do for those three.
Okay, so we're looking 3 to 5 years winter pruning and then summer pruning after that, once you've the formative shape in place.
Exactly. Unless you, again, are looking at, let's say there was a windstorm and you're looking at a tree and it lost a bunch of branches, and you think we need some new scaffold branches to grow from the tree. Then you may want to winter prune because you want to spur vigorous growth.
Hmm.
So once you know the science, you can adapt it to the tree.
Yeah, makes sense. I got to take a step back. We spoke a lot about fungal diseases. Here in Ireland, it is all pretty much fungal diseases as well. And the one that causes the most problems, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys, is canker. Is
Oh,
is that I suppose, the most prominent disease or the most troublesome disease that you see?
canker we have, and often it's a symptom of different like fungal diseases. Sometimes it can be bacterial as well, depending on
Hmm.
what the tree is. Yes, so canker, like the amazing thing is once you know how to prune correctly, how to remove a branch safely so that it heals properly, you can't just hack off branches. You have to leave the collar, and you may have done a, a podcast on this, but you have to cut just past this sort of, it looks like a little turtleneck around around the base of any branch. You have to leave that little round circle protruding bit,
Yeah.
and then you cut it, and then it can heal. So the important thing with canker is you need to remove it when you see it. Not on a rainy day, but when it's a dry day, you go out, you see some canker on a branch. It can be oozing goop. It can look hard and crispy and black. And if you decide you want to remove the whole branch, you can do that. But if you just want to shorten the branch, make sure you cut a couple of inches before you see the canker.
Hmm.
And don't put the branch in your compost pile. Get it off the site, put it in a bag, because how do things spread? The pathogen, even if it's sitting beside the tree and the branch is no longer alive, that pathogen will just blow around. So canker, you have to remove as you see. If it's on the trunk of the tree, and this has happened with us before on various trees, if it's a young tree, you're probably going to have to throw out the whole tree. But if it's an older tree, you can actually take a box cutter, like a box cutting knife,
Hmm.
put a sheet down around the bottom of the tree, and cut a circle around the infected area so that the circle only includes clean, like healthy tissue. And you're scraping out all of the bark and the dead or sick tissue underneath it, scraping that out onto the sheet so it doesn't go into the soil, and right down to the heartwood, to that hard part of the tree that would be like, people would use to make things with, right?
Hmm.
And so by carving that out, then what I would do is take something like garden sulfur and spray some garden sulfur, some antifungal organic spray in there. And the trees can heal. The trees that have had canker that we've had to take down completely are those that have canker all over the place. It's in the trunk, it's out of every branch, it's already gone through the entire system of the tree. And in that case, my friend, you have to take down the whole tree in order to protect the rest of your trees.
Hmm.
So we have to be detached. We talked earlier about community orchard projects, and people come to me and say, well, we want to dedicate a tree, people who pay for the tree. And I'm thinking, maybe don't do that. Can you imagine, the John Jones tree and it's
Yeah, and
sick
dies a
all the
little. Yeah,
time?
yeah.
It's sick all the time. And then finally it's like, sorry, John, we got to cut down your tree. We'll plant another one in your name. And it's like, yeah, no, maybe not.
Yeah.
So don't personalize them in that way, though we love our trees. Like I'm so attached to them, but if I have to cut them down, I will.
Hmm. Yeah, for the greater good of the rest of the trees, it makes sense.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I planted some apple trees, well, some apples, plums, pears a couple of years ago. Last year, one of the trees got canker in just too many places, and it just had to go. And yeah, it's you'd prefer if it didn't, but that's just the way. In order to make sure the rest of them stayed healthy, it has to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Um, Then in terms of pests, so again, pruning is going to help in terms of pests, but and to be fair, and I might just look at the kind of the most common examples here again. We have the apple moth and the plum moth, which they're probably again the most troublesome things in terms of pests. Obviously, we have some issues with birds as well at the stage where the fruit is ripe. The birds are watching it just as eagerly as the homeowner is, and if you don't get there on time, you could find that they're gone overnight. But I think apple moth and plum moth are the two that cause the most problems here. Any kind of good tips around those?
Yeah, so here we call them, and I think it's the same insect more or less, but we've got apple maggot and
Yeah, codling moth. Yeah.
codling moth. So we've got those two. And for plum, it's plum corculio.
Yeah.
So, okay, apple maggot and codling moth are somewhat easier to deal with in the sense that, well, let me backtrack. I'm just trying to think. When you understand the life cycle of the insect, so when you understand where it lays its eggs, where it lives, does it live in the soil, does it live in the bark? um, One thing we know about many pests is they hide over winter in the cracks and crevices of the tree, and they lay their eggs there. So the first thing that we try to always do is to give our trees a dormant oil spray. Here we use something called lime sulfur mixed with dormant oil. It's a kit you buy, lime sulfur and dormant oil. But everywhere you go, you can get some sort of dormant oil. And what you do is before the buds open, probably too late for you guys now. It's about time for that here. Before the buds open, when the temperature is slightly above freezing, you spray the tree with this oil and coat the tree. You put it in all the cracks and crevices, but you coat the entire tree. And hopefully you're keeping your trees nice and compact so you can do this. And it smothers overwintering insects that are inside there. So that takes care of a whole bunch of insects. Now, sadly, I don't think apple maggot and codling moth are amongst them, but there'll be other ones that you'll get rid of in that. For apple maggot and codling moth, you need to know that these insects, they lay their eggs under the skin of the baby fruit. So you think your tree is perfect. They're out there laying their eggs, and then you start to see oozing goop coming from your little apples on the tree. And you're like, oh, that doesn't look good. Sure doesn't look good. Because as that fruit grows, the egg inside hatches and it turns into a maggot or a worm and it destroys your fruit.
Hmm.
So one way you can stop that is if you see a fruitlet that is infected, that's oozing goop, you pull it off. You don't put it in your compost. You put it in a bag, you take it off the site, you put it in municipal garbage, whatever. Okay, rubbish. Get rid of it. Okay, but it's even better to prevent that from happening in the first place. And a trick that I learned because we weren't allowed to do sprays is something called orchard socks. They're also called maggot barriers. John, I don't know if women do this, but if men do this too, but when you are trying on women's shoes, you go to the shoe store, and if you're wearing like sandals, they're like, ew, don't put your foot, you're in the shoe. Here's a try-on sock, and it's a little nylon. You slip it on your foot, and then you put your foot in the shoe. just to keep everything a little clean. Um, so these orchard socks are essentially try-on socks. You can even get them on Amazon or whatever. They're called try-on socks. So what you do is you go out when the fruit is just about the size of like an inch in diameter or something or
Mhm.
less, and you slip these little sockets on the apple and tie up the top. So they're nylon, so they stretch as the fruitlet grows. The nylon stretches, and it prevents those insects from laying their eggs under the skin of the fruit. We have done that for 15 years. We've done experiments with it where, because it takes time, we get the crew out, we put on as many socks as we can on the fruitlets that are covered, 99% clean.
Oh.
The ones that aren't covered get the apple maggot or codling moth problems. So it works, but it's time consuming.
Mhm.
But it works. And you can at least do some of your fruit like that. And then the final thing, which we don't do, and I don't know if you guys have access to it, there is a spray called kaolin clay. It is just clay. It's called Surround in the States. And you can spray your tree, you follow the instructions, and it makes the fruit sort of scratchy so that when the insects land, it's uncomfortable. They don't want to
Mhm.
be there. And then they go and do something else. And the final tactic for those guys is traps. Traps, you get a sticky trap and you get a codling moth lure. So it smells like certain hormones. It attracts the male insects who come to smell this nice smell of girls, basically.
Mhm.
And then they land in the trap, which is like the shape of a diamond, and they get stuck and they die. So the girl insects are flying around with nobody to mate with, so they don't have eggs, so they don't have babies. And final tip, okay, I know that's a lot of tips, but the final tip is in the fall, when you've got fallen fruit around the tree and diseased leaves around the tree, clean everything up meticulously. Do not put it in the compost. Put it in a bag, get it off the site, put it in municipal rubbish, whatever. And you're getting rid of the pathogens from next year. You're getting rid
Mhm.
of the fungal spores. You're getting rid of any worms that are inside those apples that will just overwinter and come back full force next year, even
Mhm.
more and more. So the more you ignore things, the worse they get from year to year. Things do not go away on their own.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point for anyone listening because disease here is definitely I suppose the biggest struggle that people have when it comes to fruit trees. But what you've just talked about is exactly what you said at the start, that it's important to view this as not necessarily difficult, but continuous care of the tree. And so every year you do a little bit, pruning, uh, husbandry in terms of cleaning up the area, taking away the fruit, treatments. And every year by doing a little bit, your tree is getting stronger, your tree is getting more resilient as you go along. And while you'll always have to do a little bit, once you get that establishment right, it leads to successful fruiting for years to come. But it is a continuous process rather than a one-off treatment or prune or whatever.
Very well said. That is so very well said. Because it doesn't have to be a full-time job. It's once you know what to do, you just do it. Like again, with the parent situation, I mean, I guess parents just get used to feeding their kids 3 times a day. They don't forget to feed their kids 3 times a day, right? They don't forget to put their kids to bed or, and then the kids get older and they get more self-sufficient. Fruit trees also get more self-sufficient, as you were saying. They get healthier with this care so that they are more resilient. Did a podcast, my podcast a while back, an interview with an entomologist who has discovered that healthy trees are not of interest to fruit tree pests. So you asked about the plum corculio, and that is a really, really tricky one. I can't give you as easy solutions for that one. But saying that, the healthier your tree is, the less interesting it is for all of these pests. Again, with children, in the playground, the big bully, the big bully doesn't pick on the strong kid that's self-confident, that, doesn't have a problem. It's like, what's wrong with you? The bully picks on the one that's a little weaker, a little insecure, not super confident. And it's in terms of fruit trees and other plants, what it is a healthy tree has a lot of sweetness in it, in the leaves and whatever. It's almost too sweet
Hmm.
so the insect doesn't want, they can't digest it. They like weak trees. The weak trees exude something that they know this is the one to target. So everything I teach in my, online courses and in my books is about how to bring up your trees so that they're the strong, confident ones, so that they are resilient in the face of climate change, in the face of pests, in the face of diseases, just like we need to be resilient in this world. We want our trees to be resilient too.
Mm. That's brilliant because that is something that gets repeated probably on a monthly basis on the podcast. Healthy plants in general, whether we're talking about roses, whether we're talking about vegetables, whether we're talking about fruit trees. Healthy plants are 100%. You mentioned having an entomologist on who was able to show you specifically in relation to fruit trees, but it's true of all plants, of all, as I say, roses, vegetables, whatever. The healthier the plant, the less susceptible they are to any disease or any pest that's going. So that's good that you've emphasized that and that there is some kind of proof there as well.
There is proof. It's amazing. And his expertise, he was talking about fruit trees, but his expertise is all plants.
Hmm.
I think all edible plants. And so people might want to listen to that podcast because he is brilliant. At some point, I've written a whole bunch of books, but at some point, I want to do a book on pests and diseases. And boy, will I be featuring the science around that because it is fascinating.
Yeah. We speak a lot about soil health in relation to soil health translating to a healthy plant. How do you see soil health, or what role do you see that soil health has in fruit trees? Because again, it may seem to people fruit tree, it's up above the ground, that there isn't a huge connection between the two, maybe less so than there is when you're growing your vegetables or whatever. But it is still key. And what, in terms of your garden, your fruit trees, what do you do to encourage soil health to in
Oh,
turn?
first of all, I got to tell you, it sounds like I'm smart now, but I knew nothing. I really knew nothing when I started, and I'm only smart because I interview smart people. I'm not really smart. But when I was astonished when I first learned that people who grow orchards spend 3 years preparing the soil. We
Wow.
had this park that was like, hey, let's plant some fruit trees there. I hadn't even dug a hole to see what the quality of the soil looked like. I was like, sure, we can plant fruit trees here. And it's terrible, really compacted soil, right? But what professional growers will do is they decide they find the site, it's got to be full sun. They will test the soil to see the quality of the soil. They will plant cover crops repeatedly and add organic matter and then till it in. And they do this for 3 years and then they plant their trees. Now, saying that, most homeowners aren't going to do that, and rightly so. Hopefully, their gardens are okay. But even if you can amend the soil 6 months before you can plant the tree, or a year, or whatever, just start thinking about where that tree is going to go, just like you would be preparing the bedroom for the newborn baby, painting the walls or doing whatever, having a baby carriage or whatever you do. So, preparing the soil in advance, even if the minimum I would do now is if you've said, Susan, I want to plant an apple tree in my backyard, I'd say, okay, first thing, before you buy the tree, go dig a hole in the area that you plant your tree. Is there 12 inches of good quality soil, well drained, nice soil? If it looks a little bit too heavy, add some compost, give it some time, maybe do a little cover crop of clover or something. Let's just get it a little bit ready for the fruit tree. The next thing I would say is every year in the spring, I do it before, if possible, before the tree leaves out. Put down a layer of compost, 2 inches of compost around the roots of the tree, knowing that the feeder roots of the tree, the little tiny little fresh roots, they're the ones that take in water and nutrition. they're going to be at the outer edge of the canopy, not really close to the trunk. So mulching just 2 inches around the trunk is not going to do the trick. You want to have a beautiful big mulch circle, always extending it so that it goes towards the edge of the canopy. And people are like, what? Are you kidding? And I'm absolutely not kidding. That's what I do. I keep it all clean up till the edge of the canopy if possible.
Mhm.
So every spring you give the tree compost. Here's why. I told you that in the winter, the tree has energy in its root system.
Yep.
Once that energy is used up, it needs new energy. So if you put compost around those roots, it will start to break down by the that root energy is burnt up, and it will feed the tree, and then the tree will have leaves and it will feed itself. So mulching in the spring is really important with compost. And if you want, you can put wood chips on top of that. Wood chips break down slower. So I would always put 2 inches of compost first, or 1 inch of rotted or composted manure. That's another option. So those are the main soil health things that I can tell you about. In my book, Grow Fruit Trees Fast, I talk about how you can use holistic sprays, just diluted molasses essentially, to feed your tree and how that feeds the soil. It's a little bit of a scientific thing, which I think probably your listeners are getting a little tired of science. But there's so many things you can do to help the soil. But I think I gave you some of the basic ones.
Yeah, yeah, and it's something we talk a lot about on the podcast anyway. So I'm pretty sure that they get the gist of it. But it is true that healthy soil, healthy plant, less disease. So it's all connected, and it's important to be aware of that. Before we chat about your podcast, your book, and your YouTube channel, I have a question. Just a question from my own garden. I was gifted a family plum tree, so it has three different varieties on it. And I'm sure you don't love these, but I was gifted it. So tell me, how would I go about pruning that? Because obviously,
Oh,
I knew you were going to say that. Obviously, there's the pruning that we would have for a plum tree, which is one plum tree on one rootstock, but this is three plum trees on one rootstock. Any recommendations? I've looked at it
well,
last little while, and I'm struggling to get my head around how I'm actually going to prune this tree.
and it's such a challenge. Like I learned to graft later, and I loved grafting, and I love multi-fruit trees if you create them yourself. Like I love the idea of having a backyard tree, like let's say a backyard apple tree, and once it's a little bit mature, grafting on new branches. And when you graft on those new branches with different types of fruit, you can have an apple tree that has apples that ripen in late August, apples that ripen in, September, apples that ripen in October. You can have loads of different types of apples on one mature tree. What you would do in that case is you would use paint to signify which are your grafted branches so you don't accidentally cut them off when you're pruning. You need to know which are your important branches. Not a bad idea to do it with your young multi-plum tree as well, because as it gets older, it's going to have more branches. You need to know which are your main branches. The problem with those that the problem here is that somebody has created the structure for you that you can't change because so I would look at a multi-fruit tree, and the one question I would ask is, how can I improve air circulation without removing any of those branches? Those
Mhm.
branches have to stay. So if you see sprouts coming from the trunk, I'd mentioned to you that with central leader, you want clean trunk in between your platforms. You want 2 feet of clean trunk. So you can rub off sprouts as they pop up or snip them off if they're already branches. You can, if you find one of your main fruiting branches is getting a bit heavy, you would still take off water sprouts, upward branches, ones that don't produce fruit. You can head it back so you can shorten the branch to thicken it up a bit to make it stronger because that branch has to stay, right? So there are certain things that you can do. What you can't do is sculpt the perfect fruit bearing structure because it's already given you the structure. But you certainly can keep it, good, clean air circulation as best you can.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because as I say, I've looked at it on numerous days, and I'm struggling to figure out what way to go at it. But yeah, it has to be done soon anyway. So yeah. So we mentioned books. You've mentioned a couple of them as we chatted there. So you've written, is it 4 books
Four
on fruit
books.
trees? So tell us
Yep.
about those, just the names of them, and are they all still in publication and so on?
Absolutely. So, my first one is called Growing Urban Orchards, and that talks about my experience starting a community orchard. And I said to you, that tells you the minimum you need to know in order to grow fruit trees successfully. I've got one just here beside me. I've got Grow Fruit Trees Fast. And I like that book because, again, this goes into more depth, but you can read it in an hour. So if you're thinking of planting a fruit tree, get this, read it first so you know what you need to do. And if you have a fruit tree that you're baffled by, get this, read this so you know what you need to do. So that's a quick read for busy people, but you'll read it from front to back, in an hour, and you'll know what to do. The third book is Fruit Tree Grafting for Everyone: how to cultivate or how to create your own fruit trees. I can't remember the subtitle.
Hmm.
And that was teaching me how to do grafting and demystifying it and making it fun, which it is. And then I'm so excited. The new book is called Fruit Tree Pruning: The Science and Art of Cultivating Healthy Fruit Trees. And it talks about everything we've talked about in the show, plus a lot more about the science of pruning. My goal there is to empower you, whatever tree you have. After reading that book, you'll know how to take care of it and prune it. So, in addition to that, I have my podcast, and it's on any podcatcher, and it's called Orchard People. And like I said, I interview these amazing experts. This is my continuing education. I get to find any expert that I'm interested in learning from, and I get to find out and learn from them. And if you guys want to come on a ride and enjoy it with me, then please tune into that. And then finally, if people are interested in my online courses, you can find them at orchardpeople.com. And homeowners take them. Anybody who wants to, master gardeners take them, arborists take them. You can even get continuing education credits for arborists and professional gardeners. So yeah, I got lots of resources and I've got articles and all sorts of stuff. And finally, oh my goodness, the YouTube channel is a lot of fun. A few years ago, I started to do all my podcasts in video format because
Hmm.
they're so interesting, these people that I'm interviewing, and we edit in pictures to bring it all to life. It's not just two people talking. So those are a lot of fun too. So it's the Orchard People YouTube channel.
Well, yeah, there's lots of resources there and lots of information. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been really interesting chat. There's so much there, lots of very good information, deep information, but also very understandable information. So thank you very, very much for coming on Master My Garden podcast.
Thank you so much, John, for having me. You are really fun to chat with.
So that's been this week's episode. A huge thanks to Susan for coming on. That was really, yes, there's some very good stuff there. Like we've said it before, healthy plant equals less disease, and that's really important. And I think Susan reinforced that there. And there's great information around the pruning. So again, here in Ireland, a lot of us think of pruning as just trying to keep something in shape, but you look at it from a different angle, an angle of, you know, creating a healthier plant, and that's really where you're coming at it from. So it's not from the point of view of keeping it in check or keeping it in shape. It's about creating a healthy tree that will produce for you for years and years to come. So yeah, loads of great information there. You can check out, Susan's podcast, her YouTube channel, her books, and all of the other resources, online courses, and so on. I'll put the link in the show notes for anyone that wants to check any of those out. And that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.